Hello, I'm Pete Sumrall, and today we have an exciting teaching by my father, Dr. Lester Sumrall, on demons and deliverance. In this series, we will be exposing the occult and many other works of the devil. So stay tuned, because you won't want to miss this incredible teaching on demons and deliverance.
Christendom and Western civilization are entering their final warfare before Armageddon. In these deliverance studies of principalities and powers, we will be exposing the occult, revealing knowledge of the doctrines, words, rites, eulogies, phrases, and definitions that demon worshippers use. The only intelligent way to interpret our times is to present a biblical interpretation. Jesus prophesied that his church shall prevail. In Matthew 16, verse 18, he said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Today, the church must rise up to the greatest action of its entire history.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see a great group of wonderful students. This is the most remarkable age. There are more people learning today than ever in history. There is a greater desire for learning in our world today than ever in the history of the world. And learning is so diverse today. At one time, all learning was just one way, just by books and a teacher talking to you. But there's so many ways to learn today. And actually, the best educated people that ever lived are living right now. It's wonderful. And I am glad that so many of us are interested in God's education. And that's the reason we're in this class. We're studying, are there monsters in the spirit world? And this is section 2 of it. We took you down through quite a bit of it, but I wanted to bring you, into a person, a reputable person who knows about the subject. Are there monsters in the spirit world? Now some people think, I'm going crazy. I saw a monster, you see. I didn't see it with my natural eye, but I did see it. No, you're not going crazy. There are two worlds. There's the world that's natural, that can be seen with the natural eye, and there's the world of the spiritual that you do not see with the natural eye, but it's just as real. It is a world of spirit. And many people don't want to admit the world of spirit or accept it, but that makes no difference at all. It's there, it's real, and I have discovered it, and so I know for sure that it's real. Now, in this lesson, I wish to bring you the story of a Brazilian witch doctor who explains the spirit world to us. His name is Arlindo Oliveira. He is a prominent witch doctor, or he was one. He's now a minister of the gospel. He lives in Brazil. And when I took him personally across this land, I went to Brazil and got him, and I brought him personally across America. I took him into places like Carnegie Hall in New York City, and I took him in Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., and other fine auditoriums from the state of Florida to the state of Washington. For a 3-month period, almost every night, we had Arlindo and listening to his story, and then we'd travel with him in the daytime. So we were very well acquainted with a Brazilian witch doctor named Arlindo Oliveira. Arlindo worked with the Brazilian government for many years. He worked in the Ministry of War. He worked in the office of the president, and that was where he was working when I was so well acquainted with him. And also in the office of a famous attorney in Brazil. And I had him to take me through the government offices. And he was a man of prestige. I mean, all through there, he introduced me to many Brazilian officers in the presidential group of officers, and yet that man was a witch doctor. He was dedicated to the devil before he was born. Now, you see, possibly you haven't met anyone like that. His mother took him to a very strong witch doctor in Brazil, and she felt a spirit enter her womb. And went into the unborn child. And she said that she heard the demons say as they entered, "This is my son, this is my son." Now, they had taken him. I've learned since through the studying reincarnation that this happens all the time in India, and that they decide they decide before the child is born which of the reincarnated spirits will go and live in the child if they want to live in that family. And so this isn't an unusual situation in the world of where they worship devils and worship spirits in pagan lands. When Orlando was 3 years of age, demons that were dwelling within him caused him to have strong seizures, throwing him on the ground and throwing him here and throwing him there. But he was quite normal otherwise. They caused him to be an unruly person. He made so much trouble for his own parents that he believes that even when he was 3 years old, his family hated him. At this time, a spirit came into him and said, "I am Dr. Rubenstein." And being, a 3-year-old, he would tell it. He'd say, well, they could hear this voice of Dr. Rubenstein speaking out of the little boy's mouth, and it was a man's voice coming out of a 3-year-old's mouth. And this Dr. Rubenstein announced that he was a German physician, now deceased, of course, and was manifesting himself in this child. Now, this spirit, when Orlando was only 3 years of age, would consult with people about their illnesses and would write prescriptions in Latin with Orlando's hand doing the writing. And the sick people would take these prescriptions to the local drugstore, and they were filled by the pharmacist. And at this time, Orlando could not write a word in Portuguese or Latin. He was only 3 years old. Orlando said that at 3 years of age, only a few spirits manifested themselves in him. But he said later, when he became a full-fledged witch doctor, that he knew of at least 300 different spirits, that he knew their names, and at one time or another they had manifested themselves through him. Had manifested. When you say manifested, that means they had dwelt in him and manifested and did something through him and said, "I am so-and-so doing this." Orlando became such a problem that he was removed from his parents' home when he was only 3 years old. They could not stand him. And so the parents consulted an old African witch doctor what to do. And the old witch doctor, who had come from Africa to live in Brazil, said the child must be taken to Africa for an apprenticeship with the resources and necessities such as herbs, roots, and so forth for witchcraft were available, and teach him witchcraft. The witch doctor promised that he would even pay the money and support the child until he was tutored properly. And he said that the powers of this little Orlando were already greater than his, and he had already been a witch doctor for 60 years. And he said the boy had the greater amount of devils in him. The parents refused to permit the Brazilian witch doctor to take the little child to Africa, but they were still afraid of this child. And so they said, "Listen, we will put him in the home of an aunt." And he remembers his aunt is a very fat woman, overly fat, and was a spiritist with many demons in her. And the parents says, "Well, these two will get along all right." Orlando remembers that the African witch doctor, who was 84 years at that time, had 3 tribal marks on his face from Africa. And the witch doctor used the Ifa, that's E-P-H-A-H, which is a seashell. And through the seashell, the spirits talked to him. He also wore a lion skin all the time. And he said he was getting his message from the spirit world through the Ifa and also through the lion skin that he wore. He said his strength came from the skin of the lion. Now, when we look into this man, Orlando, I'd like to tell you a little about him, please. Now, I lived with him I met him on different occasions. I was going into Brazil preaching at that time, and I met him on several occasions, and then I brought him to this country. But Orlando said to me, he said, "The devil spoiled my life." He says, "I never had a normal childhood, and because of the devil in me, I never knew a father's love nor a mother's love in my whole life." He says, "When I went to school, the spirits made trouble for me. They wouldn't let me study. They would cause me to fight with the teacher, and when the teacher would give me work to do, the spirit would give me the answer before the teacher had presented the problem." And he says, this would make the teacher very angry, and the spirit in me would tell the teacher, says, "Well, I know more than you do." And it was Orlando's mouth and the spirit doing the talking out of him. When he was 8 years old, his spirit manifested in him while he was in school, which argued with the teacher, and the spirit said, "You're a teacher, but I know more than you do." And the teacher complained to the principal, and he was disciplined by being discharged from the school, said he couldn't go there anymore. But at 16 years of age, Orlando had many spirits manifesting itself in him. He would faint on the streets. He'd have to be picked up and taken to an ambulance or a hospital or jail. And at this time, he's living back with his parents again because he'd become a grown man. And one night a spirit manifested in him and stayed in him until 2 o'clock in the morning. And when he went home, his father said, "What kind of a child are you to come home this time of night?" Being only 16 years old. And rather than the boy speaking, the 16-year-old, a spirit spoke up out of him, said, "This is none of your business," and cursed him. This angered the father, and he spoke bitterly to the boy. And the spirit argued back. My father got a piece of wood to hit Orlando, and the spirit said, "If you're a man, you can hit me with that." But my father's arm became frozen. He couldn't even hit his own son. Frozen while it was upraised, and could not bring his arm down to hit his son. And so the father said, "Who are you?" And the spirit within the boy said, "I am Summa Quis Summa Qua." Summa. And says, "I live long before." And he says that the father says, my father did not believe it was a spirit and thought it was an enchantment of some kind. And he says, "Listen, I know all about you." He says, "I put an enchantment upon the woman you married to get her to marry you, and you couldn't have had her without me." He says, "I've been around you too." And the father broke down and says, "Yes, now I believe, and I believe that you're in my son, and it's all right." After that, the father supported Orlando and his demon work, his witchcraft. And Summa Quis Summa Qua said that he was originally an African who had died at the age of 165 years of age, and that he had lived in 350 different persons to the time he came to live with this little boy that's called Orlando. He said, "Brother Sumrall, those are strong things." Yeah, they are. They are. But if you've had no introduction into the spirit world, then you better become acquainted, because if you don't, you won't understand what it's all about. Orlando was a young man, and I asked him some questions, and one of them I asked him was this. I said, "Are you, as a witch doctor, were you above other witch doctors?" And he said, "I belong to a group of witch doctors, and I was the head of the Congers." That's C-O-N-G-E-R-S. And as a Conger, I was chief. And our sect was prohibited by the police in Rio de Janeiro. That was because so many people got killed and animals got offered, and so they were, although there were many, they are today many spiritual sects registered, they would not give this one registration. He says, "I had 300 different spirits manifesting themselves in me, and they would not permit me to register with the authorities as to who we were. They said that we were greater than the authorities of any humankind, and warned that if I tried to register, that they would not permit me, and they would not protect me at all. So I refused to register, and they promised him the protection, and said they'd punish the policemen that sought to discover them. And so he permitted them to continue. Then I said to Orlando, "Orlando, do you have a chief spirit?" You say you have 300. A chief spirit. He says, "Yes." The chief spirit in me was Tata Kavera, and that means Father Skull Bones, or Father Skeleton. He was my chief spirit. Says he told me that he had always existed, and that he had never been reincarnated, that he was a spirit and had never had reincarnation, and that he was not the spirit of a dead man of any kind. He said that he was on earth from the beginning and was already tired of being here when Jesus came a long time before. He said that he was one of the cemetery spirits, and had always been a cemetery spirit. And he claimed to have had 7,771 spirits in his legion, that he was over them, that he was a captain over them, that he looked like a large, strong, fine-looking person, wore glasses, hair reddish, wore a business suit. But when he manifested to Orlando, he looked like a skeleton, always. And he made Orlando drink rum. And he had to keep rum in his house just for Tata Kavera when he manifested himself. And this spirit always wanted to attend funerals. And Orlando would always see him at funerals sitting on top of the coffin. Nobody could see him but a spiritist. Orlando would see him. and says he liked to drink rum, and Orlando would keep 8 quarts of it ready, so that when he came, he could have all the rum he wanted. It had to go through Orlando's mouth, and the spirit enjoyed it when it was inside of him. I asked Orlando which spirits manifested in him most often, and he began to name them off. He said, Ochala, Ocham, Obum, Oxfum, Oxy, Abelimut. And I said, well, who are they? Oh, he said, Oxala is the head of all spirits. We call him the Father. He says, Ochum is the Virgin Mary that we all like to worship. Obum is known as St. George. Oxaphan is the Holy Spirit that you call the Holy Spirit. And he says, Ochasi, that's O-X-A-C-I, is St. Sebastian. And he says, Abaliut is St. Lazarus. He is king of the cemeteries. When he manifested, he would twist my body so terribly that my assistants would have to pour oil on my limbs and work them to straighten them out from the contorted joints that he would make me. And he said, when Abalut would come, he would make him eat food or meat left in the sun until it was rotten. And I had to wash down the rotten food with olive oil. And he says I could do it when Abalut was manifesting himself to me. I asked Orlando, I said, well, now, Orlando, is there a king of devils? He said, yes, there is a king of demons, and all witchcraft sects consider Oxala. Now, that was the first one I met, and that's spelled O-X-A-L-A, and it's pronounced Ochala, and he is the head of all spirits. And he said, but his African name for Oxala is equal to the claim that Jesus Christ has, he says, in this world in which we live. Orlando said he had one spirit that was named a crazy captain, a captain insane. And he says he is actually an intellectual spirit. And he says the different spirits had different powers of intellectualism. He said this spirit speaks Portuguese through his lips, Spanish, French, English, German, through his lips. He discusses science, engineering, law through my lips. He can reveal secrets of international events and politics. Now, this often happened to this man. Even in the president's palace, he would go into a coma and tell them what was happening in certain capitals of the world. When he manifests, I lie down on a bed and go into a trance. Then he consults politicians and military and legal people, and he would say, attention, there's a cabinet meeting being held in the White House in Washington, D.C. right now, and the next day the news of this meeting would be carried in the newspapers. He said, we knew it was true because the newspaper supported them the next day, and exactly what I told them was taking place. And I said, Orlando, do you know the demons you personally knew? I mean, did you know all their names? And he said, yes. Number one, all demons do have names. He says, there are no anonymous demons, none. He says, I've had manifested in me at one time or another a minimum of 300 spirits that have given me their names. And some of the spirits were leaders. They were group leaders. They were commanders over legions. And for example, as I told you about Tata Kavera, which is Father Skullbones, Father Skeleton, he had 7,771 of these just following him. And another spirit was a feminine type spirit, and she was called Imarja, the queen of the sea, and many millions follow her. I have personally seen thousands of demons at a time rising like a cloud of birds, Orlando said. And from what I've learned, there are millions of demons in the spirit world. Many claim to be dead spirits, dead saints, and the same as the images as the Roman Catholic Church. Almost every image in the Roman Catholic Church, they have a spirit that identifies with that. Perhaps I can tell you how many demons there are if you will tell me how many ants there are in all the ant hills of the world. There are literally millions and millions of them. There are clouds of evil spirits. This is a man that was for 40 years a witch doctor. He said, I had one demon in me that said he had 10,000 in his legion, that he was the captain of them. His name was Axto Boroka Jimbo. Most of these came out of Africa, you see. About a third of Brazil are black people from Africa, and they brought their religions over with them and continued to perform in these religions. I said, Orlando, where did all these demons come from that possess the people in Brazil today? He says the demons claim to come from different places. Says one that was in me claimed to come from Canada and said he was an Indian spirit. And I had him within me. He says most of them that I knew came from Africa. So that was the place where most of them came from, because that's where more worship had come from. Some claimed they came from India, and one even claimed that he came from the moon. He says another told me that he had originated in the sun, but he says I found out that they were liars, and you couldn't tell where they were from whatsoever. So I asked Galindo, I said, did any of the spirits which manifested in you, did they look like animals? He said, yes. Tata Veludo, which is Father Velvet, he looks like an ape. He's very dark and he's very hairy. And says he talked like an ape. And said when he was with me, he says he talked coarse and harsh. He said when he was with me, I made him to be my guard. And if the police or anyone was getting close to me, he would whistle, and I would know what to do from that point. I said, Orlando, do you love the demon spirits? And do they love you? Now, this was a key question that I asked him. He says, no, I actually hated most of them because they didn't treat me nice. And says, these devils always call me their apparatus, that I was their apparatus. And I was being used like a tool or a machine. And that some of the devils call me their donkey, says I was their donkey. They have no respect for their mediums, such as I was, as human beings, but often speak contemptuously of us, like a piece of machinery. Says the term apparatus is like you talk about a radio or a sender of messages or a receiver. Says you're just an apparatus, and that's all they consider you. So I said, Orlando, did these spirits stay in you, or did they come and go? He says the demon spirits always give me advance. When spirits appear to me, they always come to me face to face. He said, I've never known of a spirit retiring from me without facing me, or coming to me without facing me. He says, I have never seen a spirit's back at no time in 40 years as a witch doctor. He said, sometimes when they leave, they will melt into a wall. Sometimes they will go into a whirlwind, just around and they're gone. Sometimes they will vanish like a light being turned off, just gone. When the spirits come, it is always an uncomfortable feeling to me, and I have a hot flush all over my body, or a chill, or the hair on my head stands on end. Says also, I feel dizzy. Other times I feel ill by pain in my stomach. Other times my eyes film over that I can't see. And you never feel good when a demon comes. They do not stay continually. He says they go and come within those they possess. I said, Orlando, could you tell that it was a spirit materializing before you, or if it was a human that you were talking to? He says the spirits, oftentimes, you could not tell whether it was a human or a spirit. He says, I could only tell by looking at their feet, for the spirit's feet never touches the floor. They walk like on feet, and they make a noise as though their shoes are on the ground, but they stay about a palm's breadth above the ground. Says they do not touch the ground. So sometimes the spirits don't materialize as humans, but come in appearances like animals, or a cat, or an ape, or a grotesque thing with two heads, or something like that. But he says they have many ways of materializing, and you never know exactly which way you might see them next. So I said, Orlando, did you ever meet Satan, who is the chief of devils? He said, yes, I've met him. And he says, I did not know he was the head of the demons. He was called Exu. That's E-I-X-U, Exu. And when he manifested himself, he made me sing what he called Lucifer's tune. And here are some of the words. And he began to sing them. And translated, they're these. He says, I am the king of hell, I have two heads. One is to do the king of hell, the other is the head of Jesus of Nazareth. And one of my heads works for good, and the other one of my heads works for bad. Now he said this Exu likes to be praised, and says, we'd tell him, you're the greatest. He seemed to have millions of demons in his control. He says, but my personally chief spirit was Tata Kavera, and says he didn't want to pay much honor to this other one who claimed that he was the king of all devils. But he says another very strong devil was a female spirit. He says, though there is no real sex in the spirits. And this female devil is called Bamba Gira. And when she appears, she's always by the side of this Exu, who is a top spirit. And she has 7 devils who are her husbands, besides the one that's the top spirit. And she is a protector of prostitutes, and she helps prostitutes get their business. I said, Arlinda, did these spirits ever hurt you personally? And I hardly want to go into that, because he said, yes, they made me collect my blood and would mix it with wine that they might drink it. And he said they would, to use enchantment, we had to use my blood. And says oftentimes I didn't feel much pain when the dagger cut me open, that they might use my blood, but the spirits would just rub chalk on the wound, and so that it would heal up. And said sometimes they hurt me. On one occasion I had a dagger all the way through my leg, and I had to pull it back out. But they told me through the calf of my leg, they said, you won't get sick or anything. And sure enough, it healed up abnormally quick. I says, Arlindo, did the devils ever hurt your family? And this is one of the saddest stories that I can ever tell you. He had a brother, 8 years old, and in a trance, he saw 2 spirits as they fought over the brother, and they killed him. And when he came out of the trance, his brother lay on the bed dead. He had actually seen the death battle of his own brother, 2 spirits claiming him and wanting to be the chief spirit in him. And so they killed him. Arlindo assured me that before his conversion to Jesus Christ, that he thought he was serving God as a high priest of witchcraft. He said he was very proud of himself. He said, when these spirits drove my wife and family away from my home and destroyed my family, he says, I took refuge in the home of my sister, who had mercy upon me because I had no one to live with me. And next door to my sister, there lived a minister of the gospel, and he took an interest in me, and he called me over, and in his study, he drove the devils out of me. And he says, I became free of all these evil spirits because a full gospel minister had compassion upon me, laid his hands upon me, and commanded them to go from me. When I met him, he was working in the president's office. Soon after that, he became a full-time minister in the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's one of the most remarkable stories I've ever known. Not only did he tell me the story, but I talked to many of his friends, and they said, yes, he was a witch doctor. These things did happen in his life, and he has been set free by God's power. How glad we are that the Lord Jesus Christ sets mankind free.
LaCie Broadcasting is privileged to bring you these life-changing messages by Dr. Lester Sumrall. If you found today's teaching valuable, please consider supporting one or more of these programs and have your name added as a sponsor. Call the number on the screen to find out more. I'm Pete Sumrall. Thanks for watching.